I'm Eric Parker. This morning on CT23, our interview with U.S. Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg. We caught up with him on his visit to New London Wednesday. He was there celebrating the federal funding of a $158 million project to fix the Gold Star Bridge. Also this morning, Governor Ned Lamont, he kicked off his second term in office this past week. He joins us to talk about his priorities for Connecticut. And Dr. Radenka Maric is here in studio. She was named the University of Connecticut's 17th president in September. It's all ahead this Sunday, January the 8th. CT23 starts right now.
From Channel 3, CT23 with Eric Parker.
Good morning. This week, U.S. Department of Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg came to Connecticut to celebrate a big $158 million federal project to make improvements to the Gold Star Bridge. That's the I-95 span connecting New London and Groton. He spoke exclusively with CT23 in a sit-down, one-on-one interview. Mr. Secretary, thank you for being with us here on CT23. I heard a lot of your remarks today, and you talked about the nationwide push by the Biden administration, and really nationwide, from here to the Golden Gate Bridge. Why, if I'm just a taxpayer here in Connecticut, am I excited about today's announcement? What does it mean to me?
Well, several things. Better transportation, better supply chains, more affordable shipping of goods, and a lot of good-paying jobs. One of the things that was really exciting about being here in the New London, Groton area for this announcement was meeting with and talking to the construction workers, the union construction workers, who are really going to be able to plan for several years on a lot of work coming in, be able to really build that household wealth, home ownership, school for your kids, everything that you can have when you have those good paying jobs. So even before the work is complete, it's already going to be bringing a lot of economic benefit in this region.
I know you talked about the heavy loads that have to go around and can't even use the bridge in its current state. You said there were 40 applications. This is one of 4 major bridge projects. So does that show the level of disrepair, the level of need?
It shows the level of need. It shows the economic importance of a bridge like this. Look, you have so many people and so much freight crossing right here on I-95 that if this weren't available, if this was out of service, I think the economic implications of that would go all the way to my doorstep back in Michigan. When we talk about projects that are this big, this important, they're really, even though they happen in a particular location, in this case Connecticut, they really represent a national economic interest. And when you add the importance of having good supply chains in and around the area that hosts Electric Boat, we're also talking about national security implications too.
We saw you speaking today. Governor Lamont was there, Joe Giletti, the transportation commissioner here in Connecticut. And the governor said when he came down for the French president's visit, he met with you and he brought his transportation commissioner. You're a former chief executive of a municipality. Are those meetings important, and is that something that obviously the president and the administration has its priorities, but is it important to have that face-to-face time to talk about needs?
Yeah, absolutely. I was so glad that the governor and the transportation commissioner came over, because it gave us a chance to just get beyond what you can see on paper and really hear the story of the economic vision for this state, the revitalization that communities are going through, and what it's going to take to support that from an infrastructure perspective. Well, we're proud to be doing more work federally than has happened since the Eisenhower administration, but we also recognize that the answers don't come out of Washington. More of the funding should come out of Washington, and now it finally is. But it's really up to state leaders like the governor and local leaders to make the decisions about how that funding can be used and to bring the applications for us to try to support.
Here in Connecticut, Commissioner Giletti from the Department of Transportation has a train background, a rail background, and a lot of what we've talked about on our show has been some of his rail initiatives. And we talk about what's important with the Gold Star Bridge, but as you had your news conference today, and probably while we'll be talking, trains rumbled by here at a pretty good clip. Is that something that could come to Connecticut, some funding for that? What's the federal government looking at for rail funding? Absolutely.
This infrastructure package that the president led, that we got through Congress with support of your senators and House members here in Connecticut, that looks at the entire picture. Ports, airports, roads and bridges like this one, and definitely transit and trains as well. Matter of fact, we have $9 billion headed into the Northeast Corridor. I know 5 projects just within Connecticut have been added to the project inventory to get a look for funding there, because, again, this is an example of something that's of national concern. There is so much economic activity in the rail passenger traffic that happens on the NEC, the Northeast Corridor, as well as what happens by car and truck. It really matters to the entire U.S.
And is that corridor, the Boston to New York to Washington corridor, is that a place where rail travel maybe has a different meaning than it might in other places of the country because of the geography here?
Yeah, right. We would love to see more widespread use of passenger rail around the country, but the reality is by far the most used and most economically significant passenger rail route that is currently in operation in the United States is right here on the Northeast Corridor. And, frankly, it needs a tune-up. You get a lot of infrastructure that is 100 years old or more. The bridges, the tunnels, the tracks, the alignments, and we're investing in all of that with this funding. This is the most we've been able to put into Amtrak since Amtrak was created 50 years ago. And, our president is famously a very big supporter of Amtrak. So am I, and so are so many people I speak to here in this region.
Tell me about, we talked about roads and trains. I want to talk planes. You spent a lot of the last few weeks talking about what happened with Southwest. I read your letter. You called it a meltdown, and I think probably a lot of travelers who were affected by it would agree with you. What can you do and what can the government do to avoid that happening in the future?
Well, Southwest Airlines is responsible for running their airline, but as a watchdog, we're responsible for making sure consumers are protected. So we're going to be putting Southwest under a microscope to make sure that they follow the law, that they do things like cover people's expenses, get them their money back quickly. And we do have consumer protection authorities that we will use anytime an airline is failing to meet its responsibilities. As a matter of fact, we've set a record already on my watch for the most that we have fined airlines that failed to do that. I'm looking to Southwest to do the right thing, and if they don't, we'll be there with enforcement.
We heard Senator Richard Blumenthal from here in Connecticut talk about this passenger bill of rights, and one of the things he talked about was secondary expenses beyond just what you lost on the trip. Is that something you and the Biden administration support, expanding those protections?
I think we do need to take a look at further expanding protections. Even compared to a few months ago, we've got a new higher bar because of the work we did over the summer. That's what makes it possible for my department to enforce things like the ground expenses, the hotels and the meals that are part of the customer service plan. So we've definitely made good progress there, but I think we need to look at more. I mean, clearly air travel in the U.S. has just reached a level that has frustrated so many air travelers, including me. I'm on an airline every week, if not every day, and so many of us, almost all of us, have experienced this in some way, shape, or form. But not all airlines are alike, and what we need to do is hold accountable the airlines that aren't doing the right thing.
And you talk about helping people after something bad has happened, but a lot of the criticism you faced, certainly on social media and other places, was, hey, Southwest Airlines got $7 billion, I think it was, during COVID times. You're the commissioner, Secretary of Transportation. Why didn't you see this coming? Is that a fair criticism? And if not, is it something that you could learn from going forward?
Yeah, I think, look, the rest of the aviation system recovered within a few days of the storm. Southwest didn't. So when one corporation fails, I don't think you can blame that on the government, as convenient as that might be for the corporation. But what I do think we have a responsibility to do is make sure that the system continues improving and make sure that any individual airline, any individual company is held fully accountable to do right by passengers.
Just one last question. We've seen the, chaos going on in Washington, particularly in the House GOP this week. You're here celebrating a big past accomplishment, but certainly there's more work to be done. How do you navigate that with your priorities, given the uncertainty of the political climate in D.C.?
There's always a way to get things done, and that's our focus. It's how we've been able to get this done. Remember, when President Biden came in saying that he believed we could have bipartisan accomplishments and get a historic infrastructure bill done, a lot of people laughed, a lot of people scoffed, a lot of people said it wasn't possible, not in this bitterly divided Washington. And we got it done. We got it done with Republicans, many of them crossing the aisle to work with the president and work with Democrats on making this happen. So, the truth is, no matter what's going on in Congress, no matter who's, D's or R's in what seat, our job is to find a way. And so far, that's exactly what we've done.
All right, Secretary Buttigieg, thank you for being with us on CT23.
Thank you. Good being with you.
All right. And Governor Lamont was with Secretary Buttigieg at Wednesday's event, which was sandwiched right between the governor's swearing in and his inaugural ball. The governor joins us next to talk about his goals as he starts his second term. And later in our program, UConn's new president, Dr. Radenka Maric. We'll have them both when we come back.